Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of My Favorite Book. I'm Monica. I work at Bookland, and I'll be your host tonight. I just want to apologize in advance if our Wi-Fi connection, or actually our Ethernet connection, is not so great. We just had a big storm here in Brooklyn, and we've had a lot of weird glitches in the last few minutes. But let's give it a try. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the land from which we're broadcasting is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. Please join us in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. Bookland Inc. is a nonprofit organization located in Brooklyn, New York. We're celebrating 22 years of promoting artist books as both art, primary research materials, and tools for social justice. We distribute work by artists and organizations within the academic market. We host workshops and exhibitions, and we publish books and archival box sets. If you want to find out what an archival box set is, or to just learn more about us, here's our information. Bookland.org is our website. You can follow us on Instagram and any social media platform. My camera just glitched, so I don't know if you could hear me. I'm going to keep going. I also want to thank the New York City Department for Cultural Affairs for supporting my favorite book. And I just have one little announcement to make before we bring out our guest, Josh Mcphee. And that is, we want to share with you a free copy of our Bookland's Education Manual. This is a fantastic resource for teachers or for anybody who likes rainy day activities today and the next few days. If you're in Brooklyn or New York City area, this would come in handy. You can learn how to do a pamphlet stitch, an accordion fold, a Coptic stitch if you got lots of extra time. It's totally free. It's a collectively made resource. We encourage you to download it and share it with anybody who you think would like it. And you can find that link through Linktree/Bookland. Okie dokie. All right. So my favorite book is, it's our first serialized online program where we ask 18 different artists to quickly tell us about their very favorite book that they've ever made. Every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday throughout the entire month of June, we'll have an episode for you from 7 to 7:30 p.m. Check our website for a full schedule, or you can drop in any night on YouTube Live and catch the latest episode. Tonight, we are absolutely delighted to introduce Josh Mcphee, another longtime friend of Bookland's, who's going to present their favorite book that they've ever made, Security. I'm just going to read a brief bio about Josh, and then I'll hand it over to him. They're going to talk for about 15 minutes. We'll do a brief Q&A afterwards. And so in the meantime, if you have any questions that arise, you can put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them afterwards. Okay. Hope our internet is hanging in there. So Josh Mcphee is a designer, artist, and archivist. He is a founding member of the Justseeds Artists Cooperative, which can be found at justseeds.org, the author of an Encyclopedia of Political Record Labels, and co-editor of Signal, a journal of international political graphics and culture. He co-founded and helps run Interference Archive, a public collection of cultural materials produced by social movements, and that can be found at interferencearchive.org. All right. Hey, Josh.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm good.
Yeah. Hope your internet connection is more stable than mine tonight.
It seems good, and it is very nice here at Interference Archive.
Oh, great. So I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite book that I've made. I've been a self-publisher since high school, but I primarily think of myself as a printmaker, designer, poster and graphics producer. And so this project, Security, that I'm going to talk about was actually the first kind of quote unquote artist book that I ever made. Done a lot of zines and a lot of like books that go into the book trade, but not a lot of sort of larger scale, more intensively produced kind of art publications. So this is Security, and here I'll step back so you can get a sense of the scale here. And this book was built out of and inspired by a trip that I took in 2014 to South Africa. I went for a little shy of 2 weeks in January of 2014 to South Africa to go on book tour with my friend Billy Keniston, who had actually just published a book called Choosing to Be Free about Rick Turner, who was an anti-apartheid activist in the 1970s in South Africa, an educator who was first banned and then eventually assassinated by the South African government. And so not only is this a phenomenal project, but the opportunity to sort of jump on that tour and get to go with Billy to all these different locations across the country was something that I just couldn't give up. And so I've been inspired by and informed by the resistance culture and the anti-apartheid culture in South Africa from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s for 20 plus years. The posters, the novels, the music that came out of that struggle have been extremely influential to me. So I was really excited about the opportunity to go there and to sort of see what life was like post-apartheid. And so it wasn't at all what I expected. I'm not even entirely sure what I expected, but I guess I didn't realize how much of that trip was going to be me reflecting and thinking about the nature of racism. And that, of course, makes a lot of sense when you think about South Africa is a colonial settler state, just like the United States and Israel. It's a place where people came from Europe and largely enslaved and displaced the people that were there, a dozen plus African tribes in the case of South Africa. And then imposed a legal system to separate people based on the color of the skin, and also to import labor from other parts of the world. So in the South African example, you have people from India, people from Indonesia who are brought in, as well as Africans from other part of the African continent. So I kind of got dumped into this mix on this tour without even really knowing the full scope of what I was getting myself into. But there were a handful of things that really struck me once I was there. And one was an absolute obsession with the idea of security that exists in South Africa. Security, self-defense, kind of anti-crime measures. And then, of course, race, and these are very, very interconnected. And then the third thing, strangely enough, was science fiction. I didn't expect to go and think a lot about science fiction, but ended up popping into my head daily, over and over again, in large part because I started to feel like the experience that I was sort of engaging with in South Africa felt so familiar with the experience in the United States, but at the same time completely different, as if they were almost parallel universes. And so I could talk about that a lot, but I think actually what I wrote in the book is a lot more poetic and direct than what I'm going to ramble off the top of my head. So I'm gonna show you some pages and read a couple pages from the book, and then we'll see what we're at with time. So the book is composed of this front cover and back cover, which are sort of mirror image maze images. In the front here, you can see says security in the maze, and the back says fear. And then once you open it, the primary graphics in the book are these hand redrawn security posters that I documented when I was there. When I came back, I redrew them, and then fabric that I collected when I was in South Africa. So the landscape is completely littered with hundreds of different examples of these security signs that are on fences and walls and buildings everywhere you look. So here we go. Barriers, fences, gates, everywhere fortifications. Security is an obsession manifest, each street lined with nondescript walls. Like the strip mall in the US, in South Africa, gated entities run for endless miles, blurring into one metastasized bulwark against the outside. My thoughts are yanked back to Philip K. Dick's semi-autobiographical novel Valis. He narrates how a pink beam from outer space strikes him on the forehead, waking him to the reality that humans are actually alien intelligences. Earth, a giant maze we have built as a game for ourselves. This important piece of info forgotten as soon as we entered into this tangle of our own creation. And so, on the recto here, I've got the texts, which are taken from my journals that I made when I was there. And then on the right are on the verso are these security signs, partially obscured by these pieces of fabric, and I'll get to what that's about. For the first couple of days I'm in South Africa, everything feels different. The racism is a flag flown, and class is inextricably tethered to skin color. Even though racism is rampant back home, it is rarely this flagrant. As ridiculous as it sounds, I feel superior for it. I don't want to, I just do. I wonder if it is possible for someone from the US, especially a white person, to not have this initial response. But as the time and days wear on, it becomes just as hard to not recognize the similarities. What initially codes as other starts to blur, and everything begins to seem familiar, yet altered. South Africa is not so much dissimilar from the US, but exists in a parallel universe. Like a science fiction novel where everything correlates to the known, but manifests in unique ways. It's as if at some point on our brutal path of settler society development, an asteroid hit, and we were knocked out of phase, and two completely separate, yet profoundly analogous timelines developed. And I think I'm going to read one more page, and then we'll see where we're at with time. Or a couple pages. I take very few pictures. It feels like it's not the safest thing to be swinging around a camera. Not because of the camera itself getting stolen, but because of the attention it brings with it. On the one hand, the streets are filled with unemployed young men, often roaming with no clear destination. On the other, every wall features a sign decorated with an image of a deadly animal and an exhortation that armed men will kill you within minutes if you transgress. It's not so much that the walls and gates and security are completely irrational. Crime is crime, and people are particularly skilled at it in South Africa. But they're like a snake chasing its tail. There's no beginning or end anymore, just walls and walls and walls and walls and walls and walls. There's our sort of knight in armor coming to save you. And here's one of these vicious animals. I keep catching glimpses of alluring patterns peeping out from between the fences and security signs. Africa is known for its patterned fabrics, but in South Africa, a very unique form of patterned cloth has developed, shwe. Created through a process of acid discharge on cotton calico, this cloth, filled with bright, very tight, subtle patterns of dots, circles, and other shapes, is used for making both ceremonial outfits as well as everyday dresses and work clothes. You see it on women wherever you look. The original shwe was a form of indigo brought to Eastern Cape in the late 19th century by German immigrants. This cloth was eventually integrated into the clothing of Xhosa women, while patterns and colors of South African tribal groups were integrated into the shwe patterning. And here's a little bit of the shwe. Here's our sign. And I'm going to read a couple more pages that are about one of the places that I stayed while I was there. There's one of the great signs in 3 different languages here: English, Afrikaans, and I believe that's Zulu. Okay, here I'm going to read this little bit. Most foreign leftists that visit Joburg stay in, or at least tour, the townships to the south of the city. This is both where the majority of Black South Africans in the region live and home to one of the hearts of the anti-apartheid struggle, Soweto, or the Southwest Township. Instead, I'm on my way to a friend's parents' house in the wealthy northern suburbs. We leave the city proper and enter the world of expressways and sprawl. There's no longer any shui shui in sight. Late at night, we arrive at a large modern house in a community of similar properties. Not only a gate to the complex, but a gate to the property, a gate to the house, and gates so everyone can lock themselves into their bedrooms at night. And these gates get used, as almost every white person I meet has been robbed, often at knife or gunpoint. First thing in the morning, I meet the parents. The mom is already drunk and starts off our conversation with, "It's not like we did anything to the Africans that you didn't do worse to the Indians." Hard to argue with that. The dad introduces himself with the salvo, "I bet you didn't know there were white South Africans." This leads to a speech about how it's a good thing that all the different Black African tribes don't get along, or quote unquote, we would be in trouble, and how terrible everything has gone since the end of apartheid. But how it really isn't the Blacks' fault that they don't know how to run anything. It's quote unquote our fault for not properly training them. He was so nice enough to include me in his assessment. This acceptance of guilt passes for a certain liberalism, but also conveniently recenters him in the story, sidling Black people to make way for the great white protagonist. At least this isn't the package tour. Here's another knight in shining armor here to protect us. This is one of the most amazing of the signs that I saw. Total radio alarm protection, or TRAP, with the rabid dog. Tiger alarms. Lots of spikes. I don't know if you can see this. This is the back of the shui shui, printed in South Africa. 3 cats, which is like one of the biggest, kind of most dominant brands of shui shui that is available. And then this is a really good example of what the fabric looks like. It's absolutely gorgeous. 7 arrows. And then, this is this commemorative fabric for the African National Congress. Here we've got another dog. This one's a little happier than the other ones. There's 16 of these signs. And the entire book is screen printed. It was printed by Jesse Purcell at Repetitive Press in Toronto, who did an absolutely fabulous job. And basically, I'm really proud of this book. I went into it sort of trying to show off these signs, which I just thought were sort of phenomenal, and ended up really writing in a way that's like a lot more personal and a lot more vulnerable than I'm used to, particularly writing about race and sort of acknowledging, trying to acknowledge my own racism and my own sort of privilege stepping into this context, and sort of using this as an opportunity to try to process that, but at the same time, not shy away from some of the absolute absurdities that seem to pop up in South Africa, which I'm sure exist here, and I just, don't really see them because I live with them every day. I'm gonna read one more page, and then to sort of get at one of these absurdities. For much of the time that Nelson Mandela was in prison, the African National Congress was led by Mandela's once legal partner, Oliver Tambo. Tambo himself had to flee the country in 1960, squeezed like luggage in the trunk of author Ronald Segal's car. Once the ANC took power, they claimed that they wouldn't be naming any and all public buildings after their leadership. Oliver Tambo International Airport was one of the exceptions, but it seems appropriate given that until recently it was the airport where you were most likely to have your suitcase stolen. Which to me is just sort of a nutshell of some of the sort of amazing and funny contradictions that are embedded deep into South African society. And that's just me, really novice looking at it. I wish I could do something like this about the US, but I feel like I'm just too close to my subject matter. So hopefully a South African will come and, or maybe already has, and created or tried to create something that sort of slices through and negotiates and deals with the complexities of our society here in relationship to crime and race and all these things. So thanks everyone for listening. This is the book. Unfortunately, it's currently, well, and forever sold out. I made an edition of 30, and they sold quite quickly. But I actually I had a whole bunch of extra signs. So I made a little portfolio that collects all 16 of these signs as prints. And then also includes a booklet where I reproduced some of the shui shui, and wrote a little text about the project. And, here's a piece of Nelson Mandela shui shui commemorative fabric that was included in some of the books. Each book had unique fabric samples in it, so everyone is different. Thanks. Oh, I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Great. All right. I will say again, if anyone has any comments or questions, just put them in the chat on YouTube Live, and I'm going to go straight for my questions. First one is, well, actually, did you say already what year this was made? So
yeah. Sorry, I took the trip in 2014, and then the book was made in 2017. And so when I took the trip in January of 2014, it was actually before the Black Lives Matter movement here fully emerged. And then when the book was made, it was sort of after the first sort of evolution of that, and Trump had recently been elected. And so that was part of kind of the mindset. And actually reading it now, I can see how I would probably write it differently given the evolution of politics at this point over the past year in particular.
Cool. So my big question is, why did you go to all the work of redrawing those signs when you had the photographs of them? It seems like a lot of work, but it also seems like there was something in it that was important to you. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, on a practical sense, I didn't have good photographs. I took all these photos surreptitiously. So when I went in 2014, I didn't have, it was before I had a smartphone with a good camera. I mean, it's hard to imagine that, like, even as early as 7 years ago, that wasn't as common as it is now. And so I had a small, cheap digital camera that I just sort of kept around my wrist, but like sort of in my hand. And I mentioned it in the book, but I wasn't worried about losing the camera. But most of the people I met in South Africa were like, do not walk around with any tech, both black and white, because it's just inviting people to mess with you. So I would just sort of kind of quickly pick it up and take a quick picture. And so I almost had just these sort of like blurry, very quick images of these signs. So I kind of had to reproduce them. But then through the act of reproducing them, it was sort of interesting trying to kind of get into the mindset of the sort of really thinking about what these things represented and how all these signs are all filled with like animals and sharp points and references to weapons, and that like even the ones that on the surface look kind of banal, ultimately right under it is there look sort of rippling with a violence that's sort of unspoken, and to sort of like embody, like to have to sort of recreate that was a sort of interesting process.
Uh-oh, the fourth wall is broken down. we have domestic ambiance. Okay, so so I do. We did have another question. Okay, we do have a question. Is it safe to say that all the security companies depicted are owned by white people? It seems like all the icons are signaling white supremacy.
My guess is actually no. that's one of the things that's really interesting is that, well, some of them are more ad hoc. All the larger ones, definitely and absolutely. Some of the smaller ones, no. But even the larger ones, one of the things that's interesting is that even though they're owned by white people, they're often entirely run by Black South Africans. And so like the whole security apparatus is, you know, a massive employment scheme as well. And so there's a lot of different people have an investment in it. It's part of what makes it so complicated.
All right, my other question that I had for you was, are there other books that you've done recently or that you're working on right now that deal with the issue of either South Africa, not the issue, but the topic of South Africa, or the issue of security or surveillance?
I did a follow-up book to this about surveillance called Smile, You're on Camera, where it was a similar kind of like collection. A lot of like the publications that I do ultimately are in part like collections of things being sort of analyzed or represented. And so I, for about a year, everywhere I traveled, I took pictures of every single icon of a security camera that I saw. And then I assembled all those icons and created a book in which each page you turn an additional icon of a camera is added, so that by the time you get to the end of the book, the pages are completely unreadable because there's so many security cameras piled on top of each other, which for me is sort of a metaphor for how, you know, there's more cameras than there are people in a way in our society at this point. There's so much security data, it's impossible to actually analyze it all. That it becomes just overwhelming and completely sort of actually in the long run, it in a lot of ways fails to function at even what it is supposed to be doing.
So we have someone in the audience who knows about your African book collection, but we are 1 minute away from 7:30. So maybe you could just give us a little intel on what the African book collection is all about.
Sure. You know, when I was in college, back actually I think it was in 1991, maybe 1992. I had a professor from Ghana named Yakuba Saka, who I took a class of his, and the first thing that he did with every class that he taught is that he handed out a blank map of Africa and had people fill out the names of every single country and the capital of every single country. It was like a blank map. And in the entire time that he had been teaching, no one had ever gotten more than 3 things right. And it just made me realize how much I didn't know. That like I had gone through high school and beginning of university, literally knowing not a single thing about a continent as large as North America with as many people on it. And so that started me on kind of a lifelong path to sort of trying to learn and read and understand about Africa. And part of that was collecting books about and written by Africans, which then sort of evolved into amassing a huge collection of largely literature written by Africans, which has morphed into 20 archive boxes of books. So yes, I am a collector of things.
Yes, you are. So it's 7:30, so I'm just going to wrap up if you don't mind. I do want to share with everybody a couple of links so that you know how to get in touch with Josh. You can follow Josh at jmcphee on Instagram. joshmcphee.card with 2 R's.co is there's a bunch of links, including his artist link to justseeds.org. Let me just go right through. Here's justseeds.org. You can check out, I mentioned that in the beginning, and also interferencearchive.org, which Josh is a co-founder of.
And can I just say one more really, very quick thing, which is that although I'm an obsessive collector, I almost always really try to convert my collections at some point into publicly accessible archives, whether that means starting something like Interference Archive, or it means finding a home for the collections. And so right now, Booklyn is actually trying to find an institution that could or would want to collect this African book collection. So if you're at an educational institution or know of one that would possibly be interested in this collection, which is really about kind of the objectness and the sort of the legacy of publishing of African authors, particularly in Africa, then please get in touch with Booklyn, because we would love to put this collection somewhere where more people can access it and use it.
Perfect segue. Here's again, Booklyn's contact information. You can get in touch with us if you're interested in the African book collection. Also at Linktree/Booklyn, you can download a free copy of Booklyn's new education manual. Let's see, tomorrow night at from 7 to 7:30, we have Homey House Press and Adriana Monsalve. She is going to talk about her favorite book that they've published called Sammy's, and it's about food and identity. All of this can be found at Linktree/Booklyn. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Wait. I can't do it, but the button is somewhere around here. Subscribe to our channel, come back tomorrow, check out our website, and thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time to share Security with us. It's a fantastic book. Last thing, if you go to booklyn.org, I just kicked up a few of Josh's pieces that are available to our homepage, so you can find them very easily. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Booklyn.
Thanks, Josh. Good night.
Good night.